In spite of the increase in the price of crude oil globally, the pump price of petrol in Nigeria has remained within the 617 naira per litre threshold. Now, economists are pointing out that this may mean that the pump price of petrol is being subsidized. Well, we're joined now by oil and gas expert Madaki Ameh, who is managing partner and CEO at BBH Consulting. Now,
thank you very much for joining us on Newsnight. No, it's becoming both worrisome and confusing for citizens because they would say that, well, we can say mixed feelings, that we're happy that, okay, at least it's pegged, quote unquote, at 617 naira per litre. But then when you now look at what's happening globally to oil price, then it's not yet uhuru. So some are beginning to suspect perhaps subsidy payment is back. What are your observations?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is a very timely conversation. Timely in the sense that, you know, I will caption this, you know, the return of the ghost of subsidy. You know, when people have made so much money from a process, it's extremely difficult to call it off. So, you know, those who have become used to the sleaze that subsidy has become these several decades that existed in Nigeria, we'll just be watching to see the slightest signal, you know, and then they will cash in on it and say, yes, you are back. I read one of the reports where, you know, I think about over 100 billion, you know, was said to have been spent on subsidy already, you know, in the month of August.
Yes.
So what that means already, you know, is that because of the opaqueness in the industry and the fact that nobody actually audits what they do, you know, they just announce it, you know, and everybody takes it hook, line, and sinker. And this has been on for quite some time. You know, this has become another source of sleaze, you know. So it's creeping in, you know, but needlessly so. You know, I've said it from the beginning that subsidy has always been a self-inflicted injury. For a country like Nigeria, which is an oil-producing country, as opposed to an oil, you know, purchasing country, we have no business talking about subsidy or holding our breath when the price of crude oil goes up in the international market. Because, you know, so we're doing this to ourselves actually. We know we can, even today, we can have a 200 naira per litre pump price of petrol, diesel and kerosene. But I really don't know what they're doing at NNPC, you know, and why they're inflicting this pain on Nigerians. It's completely needless. And, you know, we're talking about this for years, you know, but nobody listens. And
well, I mean, you took it right out of my mouth on the issue of whether, I mean, that it's a needless, you know, pain, self-inflicted pain. Who are the people who really benefit from this subsidy? And when you hear from the federal government that NNPCL struck a deal with, you know, Afrexim Bank to get $3 billion to shore up the naira, you know, and to avoid this situation. What has even happened to that particular deal? And how desirable is this subsidy, considering that Nigerians really cannot afford any higher prices of pump price of petrol?
well, I don't know whether it was my eyes, but I saw on the NNPC station price board today that their price is actually 613 naira. So, yeah, so that means, you know, if that's their benchmark price, then we are talking of a higher amount in terms of subsidy, because they lowered the pump price, you know, at NNPC, they higher the subsidy. I saw 613 naira today, and I was a bit, you know, concerned, you know, how they arrived at their pricing. But the reality is this, you know, first of all, I think it's a dumb policy to borrow money to shore up the value of your currency, because there's a lot of sleaze. You know, it's a needless, you know, shock in the economy. You know, this is a broke country, you know, and then in our broken state, you know, somebody is borrowing money in order to shore up the value of the naira. You and I know that the value of the naira cannot be shored up in any artificial way, you know. So that's again another, you know, needless exposure, you know, that the country is going through. But we came here to talk about subsidy. And honestly, subsidy, like I said, is a self-inflicted injury. We have absolutely no business paying the kind of price that we're paying right now, you know, for petrol. I traveled to Benue last week, you know, to Makurdi, my state capital. You know, a journey that's about 3.5 hours. I spent to and fro. I spent 70,000 naira fueling my car. And what is it? What are we doing to ourselves? See, I try to create the distinction, between being an oil producing country and an oil purchasing country. We produce crude oil. So we have no business being worried about the international price of crude. What we should be looking at is the wellhead cost of a barrel of crude oil. You get the point? And the wellhead cost, no matter how inefficiently you want to produce. I used to work for Shell. I worked for Shell for 12 years, and I retired from Shell early, 15 years ago, in 2008. And I played a lot of roles in that industry for the period I was there. Living as managing counsel, legislative development. So I was actually quite, high up in the organization.
Right.
So I know what I'm talking about. When I was Pengasam vice chairman in Shell, we were having an industrial action on account of the fact that the owners of the company, the foreign owners, wanted to cream off the top echelon of Nigerian staff, at the time. That was before Basil Omiyi became the managing director of Shell, the first ever indigenous managing director of Shell. It was the direct struggle of Pengasam that led to Basil Omiyi being appointed as, the first ever indigenous MD of Shell, and subsequently it has always been through Mutiu Sumonu, now to Osagi Okumbo. So no foreigner is going to expect to become MD of Shell anymore. In the course of that struggle, one thing we found out was, why they said they wanted to cream off Nigerians at the time was because they said the unit operating expenditure, that's the unit OPEX, which is the benchmark for efficiency in the industry, was too high. And that Shell was running the highest unit OPEX in the industry. So we became privy to information from DPR, which compared the unit OPEX of all the 5 major oil companies. And it turned out that Shell was the most efficient because we were doing the highest production. Okay. And the average unit OPEX of a barrel of crude oil as at 2007 when this happened? It was $3.25 per barrel. That's the cost of getting a barrel of crude oil out of the ground. You get the point? $3.25. So, that's 16 years ago. Now, what has happened, to balloon the cost of the barrel, that's the cost of production of a barrel to between $25 and $30, which is what I hear these days. You have to be as inefficient as it gets, for you to produce a barrel of crude oil in Nigeria, where the wells are actually energized from, naturally. To produce it at $30 a barrel. But this is called barrel padding. They pad the cost of, the operators pad the cost of the barrel so that they can put all manner of inefficiencies, expatriate costs, everything that you can imagine, into that barrel. And when they do that, the Nigerian public bears the brunt. So, in my view, no matter how inefficiently any of the companies produce, they should not produce at anything higher than a unit OPEX of, let's say, $7 to $10 per barrel, maximum. Good. And if that is the case, then the input cost into the cost of products at the pump must be $10 because we produce the crude. We don't buy it in the international market. It's like saying you produce yams and as a farmer. And because the yams is $10 a tuber in New York, when you want to give 5 tubers of yams to your wife to cook for your children, you will say this 5 tubers is $50. So just know how you peel the yams. You get the point. That's exactly what we're doing to ourselves.
You know what I like about your submission tonight? You started from the worst case scenario, and that's quite exciting. But let's also flip it yet again. The Federal Account Allocation Committee is reported to have received a dividend of 275 million, yet again, dollars from the Nigeria Liquefied Natural Gas Company. And out of that, the National Petroleum Company Limited, the NNPCL, got 196.4 million naira. What for?
In August.
August last year, last month. What for? For subsidy. So where does that lead us?
Yeah, because like I told you, the ghosts are back. They've been, for a few months now, they've not made any money from subsidy. So at the slightest opportunity, they will now remind you that crude oil is now trading at whatever price it is in the international market. And so, they have to find a way of subsidizing. Like I told you,
If
like I told you,
yeah.
we do not need to pay a dime to anybody as subsidy if we do the right thing. You have to realize that 80% of the price of any of the products, petrol, diesel, kerosene, aviation fuel, 80% of the price is made up of the cost of crude oil. So the only way to address this crude oil subsidy for all time is for the government to have the boldness to say, yes, we are not buying this crude, it's ours. The 445,000 barrels that is set aside for local consumption will not be priced at the international price. Because that's like selling to yourself, at a price that you have no control over, and then telling yourself that the price has become too much, and then telling yourself that you have to then subsidize it. What you should do is to reduce the input cost of the cost of a barrel. People argue that that our refineries never function.
Right.
I agree. It's even better that you refine abroad because it's more efficient. It's cheaper to refine abroad because the only cost difference is actually the cost of shipment outwards and shipment inwards.
Even in the long term?
Yes, even in the long term. The only difference, really, the only advantage of refining locally is if the multiplier effect in terms of employment creation, and the value addition, which is good.
Yeah.
But now that because our refineries are permanently in the state of being turned around, for as long as I've been an adult, you're either turning around or you're about to turn around Nigerian refineries. So it's a joke, and they keep playing this joke. First of all, by putting square pegs in round holes. Right. The people who end up being ministers of petroleum or ministers of state for petroleum or whatever it is are people who know next to nothing about the oil industry. Even including the current crop of people.
Problem. Why do you think government is being opaque about this, reluctant to own up that subsidy has really come back? 30 seconds.
Well, I don't know why, but again, I think it's those who are benefiting from it big time.
Right.
And those people who are benefiting from this big time will never let us go. But the pain about this whole thing is that the Nigerian public is bleeding. The sort of money people spend on petrol these days is actually atrocious. And nobody's even talking about the cost of diesel. The economy is dying because of the sheer cost of diesel. But why should diesel be more expensive than petrol? Because at the end of the day, when you do a refining process, through the catalytic cracking process, diesel is actually supposed to be cheaper than petrol. But here in Nigeria, we're in the theater of the absurd. And the government is just running, blind and being led by the nose.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Madaki Ahmed, Managing Partner, CEO, BBH Consulting. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Newsnight.
Thank you so much.